Hey everyone! The discovery of the Americas by the explorers of the 15th and 16th centuries opened up a variety of possibilities to Europeans ready to uproot and relocate to the New World. The new settlers generally had little interest in or sympathy for the native populations they encountered. They either ignored them or pushed them aside, as in North America, or devastated them in the search for plunder, as in Central and South America. The earliest European settlers in America arrived with only the most basic provisions to recreate their material existence. Most brought very little in the way of furniture beyond a chest, small boxes, and other basic storage containers. Plentiful American timber made it uneconomic to ship bulky furniture across the Atlantic, and thus, from the very beginning, furniture making was an essential trade in the colonies. American furniture of the early colonial period generally falls under two stylistic categories: the 17th century style or the William and Mary style. Let's take a quick look at how the design styles we've studied thus far correlate to the names of the design styles in England and her colonies. First, 17th century style is related to medieval and Renaissance design styles. So, for example, the Tudor style shows the first evidence of the English Renaissance, and the Elizabethan era that follows is commonly known as a time of English greatness. Think defeat of the Spanish Armada, the poetry and drama of Shakespeare, the music of William Byrd. In the slide, you're looking at pictures of William Shakespeare, his birthplace home at Stratford-upon-Avon, and the Globe Theatre in London, both of which are examples of Tudor-style construction, which is a half-timber wood building. So following 17th century style is William and Mary style. This relates strongly to the Baroque design style we have studied already. After that, we see the Georgian era, which encapsulates design styles and particular designers whose styles strongly relate to Rococo and neoclassical styles. So, back to America. The design style of the early colonial period generally falls under the two different stylistic categories I mentioned, either 17th century style or William and Mary. The typical early colonial American house was simply an English medieval house with a wooden exterior and small windows with leaded glass. With the lack of plaster and brick in America and the variation in weather from hot to cold and damp to dry, the best solution was to cover the exterior of homes with wooden shingles or clapboards. Also, due to weather, the salt box shaped house became typical because its roof, being so close to the ground on that sloped side, really helps protect against winter wind and storms coming off the sea. The Cape Cod cottage was a house of this type, often built by ship's carpenters without foundations, so it sort of floated with the movement of the sand dunes of the Cape. The house you're looking at here in the slide is Hoxie House in Sandwich, Mass. This is the interior of Hoxie House. There's no electricity, central heating, or plumbing. The fireplace is what provides heat to the home and serves as the kitchen. So the salt box originated in New England and is an example of American colonial architecture. Folklore holds that the salt box form was popularized by Queen Anne's taxation of houses greater than 1 story. Since the rear of the roof descended to the height of the single-story building, the structure was supposedly exempt from the tax. This house is the Thomas Lee House in East Lyme, Connecticut. Actually, the saltbox shape often evolved organically from the need for additional space for growing families. So if you had your regular construction house, adding a lean-to addition was an economical way to enlarge the house. Here you're looking at the Nehemiah Royce House in Wallingford, Connecticut. It was built around 1672. The roof style is also known as a cat slide roof. Any roof that on one side extends down below the main eave height, providing greater area under the roof without an increase in the ridge height. The house you're looking at here is the Thomas Hawley House in Monroe, Connecticut, built around 1755. The earliest saltbox houses were created when a lean-to addition was added onto the rear of the original house, extending the roof line sometimes to less than 6 feet from ground level. Old weathered clapboards are still in place in parts of the original rear exterior walls of some of the earliest New England saltbox houses. Here at the Comfort Star House you are looking at in Guilford, Connecticut, the hand-riven oak clapboards are preserved in place in the attic that was created when the lean-to was added onto the original house. So if you're on the interior, in other words, in some places you can actually see those original clapboards and know that this is where the addition occurred to the house. The saltbox style was popular for structures throughout the colonial period and into the early republic, perhaps because of the simplicity of its design. Saltbox homes can also be found in parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. So again, here you're looking at the Comfort Star House in Guilford, Connecticut, which was built around 1695. As we discussed, the 17th century style reflects late medieval and Renaissance traditions, carried over to the New World by immigrant craftsmen. Furniture in this style is frequently made of oak and constructed with straight members joined at right angles. So you have furniture that is very sturdy, massive, low horizontal proportions. Since outlines tend to be rigidly rectilinear, craftsmen gave the pieces visual interest through an abundance of surface ornamentation, low relief carving, applied moldings and turnings, and paint. This piece has something called a bun foot. It refers to the shape of the foot, which looks like a big bun sitting on the bottom. And it shows a decorative detail called strap work on the top and side panels of it, which is really a low relief carving that just looks like thin strips of decorative detail, again called strap work. The front face of the cabinet opens to reveal small storage compartments. And again, reflecting the late medieval influence, we see a lot of storage chests and things like that. These would have been the few things that might have actually come over with new colonists. So although there were hundreds of furniture makers working in the English and Dutch-speaking colonies of America in the 17th century, only a handful can be identified today. In New England, two of the best documented are William Searle and Thomas Dennis, who trained in Devonshire, England, before eventually settling in Ipswich, Massachusetts during the 1660s. Once in America, Searle and Dennis continued to produce objects in the same manner as they had in England, which is very typical. Their distinctive, excessively intricate carving is attributed to Renaissance designs, which became popular surface ornaments for medieval forms such as the joined lift top chest. So 17th century furniture was made by one of two different types of tradesmen. There are joiners and there are turners. And the difference is the way that they work. Joiners joined together straight wooden boards shaped with axes and saws and smoothed them with planes. By contrast, turners shaped wood with chisels and gouges while it spun or turned on a lathe. So they're holding a chisel or a gouge to the piece of wood while it's spinning, turning on a lathe. Turned chairs were actually a cheaper alternative to joined ones due to the speed with which their component parts could be turned on a lathe and the simple round mortise and tenon joints that held them together. This chair's parts that you're looking at here in the slide are all turned on a lathe, which is how they get their round-shaped details. Think of it kind of like sculpting clay pottery on a wheel. So as the wheel's spinning, your hands are molding that clay. Think of it the same way, just holding a gouge to something turning on a lathe. And the reason why it's less labor intensive is because you can think of it almost as a more mechanical process. This is a detailed look at a simple round spindle mortise and tenon joint that I mentioned in the last slide. This is the way turned pieces are put together. So we're looking at the construction method of the furniture pieces. This line drawing of the spindleback chair shows a good detailed breakdown of the terminology for parts of a chair. Take special note of a few pieces of vocabulary terms that are probably new to you. So you see on the very top of the chair, finials. These are a decorative part that are basically just like a little top cap to that rear post. Spindles are the vertical bars in the back of the chair. Again, a very decorative turned piece that adds some of the surface ornamentation to the chair. The stile is the upper part of the rear post of the chair that holds the finial on the top. So again, another highly decorative piece of the chair. And then lastly, stretchers are probably a new term to you. Stretchers are the pieces that hold all of the legs together. And what these do is instead of just having 4 individual legs of a chair, you actually have bars holding them together, which keeps the chair from racking and keeps the chair more stable and sturdy. All right, so by contrast to the turn chair we just saw, this is a joined chair. Joined chairs relied more on complicated rectangular mortise and tenon joints that required more time to lay out, saw, and fit. This is a detailed look at a rectangular mortise and tenon joint. So you see a piece that would have been sawn, gouged, chiseled into a rectangular piece that slides into a rectangular opening. And that way these two pieces interlock like puzzle pieces. The round mortise and tenon joint is similar, but again uses more like that round dowel that slides into the round, like a round peg sliding into a round hole. This chair, called a ladder back chair or a slat back chair, is an example of both styles of mortise and tenon construction. It has turned stiles with teardrop finials that hold 5 arched horizontal slats that all graduate in height as they go up towards the top. They get a little bigger. It has turned front legs with ball feet and a front stretcher with a design that's called a double vase and disc turning. Believe it or not, all of these little details and turnings have different names. We won't go through all of them, but that is a very standard one with the double vase and disc turning. The chair also has a rush seat, which is made of a natural reed. It's very typical of early colonial furniture. Ladder back chairs were widely produced for utilitarian use. So, as a quick recap of how the chair is put together, take a slightly longer look to visually identify which parts use a turned mortise and tenon and which parts are joined mortise and tenon. Which parts, again, are more difficult and why? Moving into the interior, instead of just looking at furniture, the right-angled mortise and tenon construction of the 17th century style furniture is also evident in the architecture of the period. For instance, this room from the Samuel Hart House in Ipswich, Massachusetts, circa 1600, is constructed with massive posts and beams, connected by mortise and tenon joints secured with wooden pins. So no matter the scale, it's still considered mortise and tenon. Similar construction techniques were used in joined furniture. Most 17th century joiners were multi-skilled craftsmen capable not only of constructing a house frame, but also furnishing it. So this is the Hart House in Ipswich, Massachusetts, built around 1680. Here we're still at the Hart House in Ipswich, Mass. Note the small leaded windows that show the relationship of its design to the medieval style. Moving along, the 1660 restoration of Charles II, who had been in exile in France, brought to England a new design sensibility based on the court fashions of Louis XIV. Known as the early Baroque, this style combined various continental and Asian influences to create furniture forms that were richer and more curvilinear with more vertical proportions. Remember the Baroque drama. Although elements of this new style first appeared in English court circles during the 1660s, it was not until the reign of William and Mary that the style spread throughout England and her colonies, which is the reason for its name. Furniture in the early Baroque or William and Mary style broke away from the solid horizontal massing and rectilinear outlines of the preceding era. Chairs became more slender and vertically oriented, with tall backs and gracefully turned posts and legs. Case pieces were lifted off the floor and precariously supported on delicately turned legs. The new height was made possible by a new joinery technique known as dovetailing, in which case sides and fronts are fastened with interlocking joints that resemble the shape of a tail of a dove. Dovetailing allowed for the use of thinner boards and lent itself to lighter, more vertically oriented construction. I always think these pieces look like fat birds on long, skinny legs. Here's a detail of the dovetailed joints of the actual drawer itself from the high chest of drawers. You can see in the little design detail how the dovetail joint actually works. So it basically looks like the tail of a dove, which interlocks into a cutout that is in the same shape of the tail of a dove. And then you see the drawer itself is also constructed in the same way. You can look for this same detail today on higher quality pieces of furniture. Start taking a look at your dresser drawers and things like that around your house. Lower quality furniture like IKEA stuff, all the typical things that we have, will be either glued together or they'll use like screws and fasteners to hold it together. But a really nice solid construction still to this day is going to have dovetail joinery. There's some new specialized furniture forms such as dining tables, high chests, desks, and easy chairs, reflecting a growing concern for comfort and luxury in the early 18th century, again relating to the Baroque design style. Thin sheets or veneers of highly figured wood were glued to case fronts and tabletops to create vibrant patterns and contrasting colors. Boldly turned legs and the back posts of chairs created dramatic interplays between thick and thin and between straight and curved. The craftsmen trained in the techniques of dovetailing and veneering came to be known as cabinet makers. The William and Mary style forms they produced are often characterized by a sense of energy and movement due to their contrasting colors, textures, and the vigorous Baroque outlines of their turned parts. Again, think of the Baroque details you all mentioned in some of your comments about Beauty and the Beast, these large, bulging, curved forms. You can kind of think of that wardrobe character. And we have a variation of that big ball or bun foot on the bottom of this piece. Another new specialized furniture form is the gate leg table. The characteristics are that it has leaves supported by single or double wing legs or gates, and there's bulky turnings on thick legs. What's neat about the gate leg table is that they're really practical in small houses because they can be folded up to save space. So that gate leg that opens up that then supports the leaf that lifts up extends the table to a larger size. As I mentioned, there's an increasing emphasis on luxury and comfort. The wingback easy chair is an example of this. In Portsmouth, New Hampshire, the lumber merchant John Wentworth filled his spacious home with a combination of English and locally made furniture in the fashionable William and Mary style. Wealthy colonists such as Wentworth were instrumental in bringing the new style to America. However, it never achieved widespread popularity in the colonies. Outside of major port cities, the influence of the William and Mary style was pretty marginal. Take a note of the spiral-turned balusters. Does this remind you of anything that we saw in the Baroque period in Italy? It should. It looks a lot like Bernini's Baldacchino from St. Peter's. The William and Mary style fell out of fashion in the 1720s. Its emphasis on opulent veneered surfaces and attenuated and precarious furniture forms didn't reappear in America until the rise of neoclassicism in the late 18th century. In the intervening years, that is roughly 1730 to 1790, the solid massing, serpentine outlines, and naturalistic carving of the Queen Anne and Chippendale styles prevailed.